John Bunyan, author. 1. God uses people of many different kinds of backgrounds. Sometimes we are surprised at the type of person who becomes an important servant of God. People who knew John Bunyan when he was a young man never expected him to become a preacher or write books, especially a bestseller that has sold more copies than any other book in history except the Bible. There are many academic books on theology and doctrine, but Bunyan wrote a simple adventure story. This story brings the theological truths of Christianity to the common person. This book is titled The Pilgrim's Progress. 2. John Bunyan was born in 1628 in England. He went to a local school for poor children for a few years. Sometimes he helped his family, but often he played games with the other boys in town. He was not interested in church or Christianity. After serving in the army for a few years, Bunyan returned to his hometown and to his life as a carefree sinner. He married a good Christian girl and tried to change his bad habits. For some years he went to church and struggled against sin and God. He did not want to go to hell, but he was enjoying his life as a sinner. 3. During these years Bunyan felt God calling him and telling him to give up his sinful ways. He tried for a time, but he always found it too hard to change. Sometimes he would be proud of going to church, but there was no joy in his heart. Finally, through the friendship of his pastor, John accepted the promises of God. He was forgiven, baptized, and confident in the grace of God. In his autobiography, he wrote, "Conversion to God is not so easy and so smooth a thing as some would have meant to believe it is." He realized that it takes a lot of work to live a Christian life. His personal experience became part of the story in The Pilgrim's Progress. The main character in the book has many struggles in his walk through life, too. 4. During this time, the Church of England and the independent churches known as Puritan churches experienced many problems. The Puritans believed in a personal experience of conversion. Being a member of a church was not enough to get to heaven. John Bunyan was converted by a Puritan pastor and then he became a pastor in a Puritan church. While Bunyan was a pastor, the king turned against the Puritans. Bunyan was arrested and put in prison for 12 years. While in prison he was allowed some visitors and books. 5. During his time in prison Bunyan studied his Bible and wrote over 60 books. He wrote his autobiography, Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners, and his most famous book, The Pilgrim's Progress. This is a story about a pilgrim, or traveler, named Christian, who walks to the heavenly city. Along the way, he has many adventures and problems. His journey is like ours as we live the Christian life. 6. In 1672 Bunyan was released from prison. He returned to his church to preach, but in 1675 he was imprisoned again for 6 months. After his second release Bunyan continued to pastor the church and preach in other towns. John Bunyan preached with power and conviction. People listened to the message of God's truths. Their lives were changed as they experienced God's grace and forgiveness. 7. John Bunyan traveled on horseback to preach in many towns. One day he was caught in a rainstorm and became ill. Several days later he died. His message of living the Christian life continues to be heard through his books. The Pilgrim's Progress has been translated into over 100 languages and read by millions of people. Through this book, John Bunyan encourages us to set our eyes on the heavenly city and continue walking on the road that leads to eternal life.